Good morning and welcome to the session Implementing Real-Time Text in the Framework of the European Accessibility Act. So if this is not the session you've planned to attend, then just look for the other sessions that are now starting. So this is about the European Accessibility Act that requires access to emergency service for end users with disabilities to be functionally equivalent to a regular call to 112, and sets a requirement for the implementation of real-time text by June 2027. So in this session, we will examine some RTT implementation plans and projects and consider what functionality equivalent real-time text service looks like. So my name is Wolfgang Kampichler. I'm EANA Technical and Operations Co-Chair, and I'm also with Frequentis. And we have three great speakers today. So first speaker is Daniel Casas. Daniel is Accessibility Policy Officer at the European Disability Forum, and he is going to talk about towards accessibility emergency communications, sharing views of persons with disabilities. Our second speaker, Thor Nielsen. Thor is VP Global Sales of nWise. He is going to talk about implementing real-time text in the core network. And third speaker, Mick Kelly, Head of Operations, Emergency Calls, Answering Services, British Telecom Ireland. Mick is talking about challenges for PSAPs in implementing real-time text and beyond. So we will have a panel discussion afterwards, and we also have the Q&A session after the third presentation. So you have time to think of your questions until Mick has finished his talk, and I will pass on to Daniel.
So hello, good morning, everyone. As it has been said, I'm Daniel Casas, and I'm Accessibility Policy Officer at the European Disability Forum. And what I'll try to do today is to briefly explain what is the views and the positions of persons with disabilities when it comes to emergency communications. So quite briefly, what is the European Disability Forum? The European Disability Forum is an umbrella organization that brings together organizations of persons with disabilities from all over Europe. And we can say that together we represent more than 100 million persons with disabilities in Europe. Our main goal is the implementation of the United Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And to that end, we collaborate with public authorities and also private stakeholders. We are based in Brussels, so also one of the main areas we work in is the European Union and European policies. And as a background, I would like to mention also that the United Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has been signed by the European Union and its member states, and therefore, as part of this convention, they are obliged also to take action to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities are respected. So I would like to start by giving some kind of background and context on what disability is, so we really understand in the context of today's conversation. And to do so, I'm going to use the definition used in the convention that I mentioned, which says basically that disability is a long-term physical, sensorial, mental, and intellectual impairment, which in interaction with various barriers can hinder the full and effective participation of someone in society on equal basis with others. Within this definition, there's a concept that's quite important and relevant, which are the barriers. And those barriers are created externally by society. They can be removed, and those barriers are the ones that shape to what extent your disability can affect the way you access transport, you access education, employment, and in the context also of today's conversation, also you can access emergency services. We can say that in Europe there's around 100 million persons with some kind of disability, and we need to understand that it's not something that you are born with, it's something that you can acquire also later in your life as a result of an accident, but also as a result of age, with some impairments such as hearing and visual, which will increase over the years as Europe also grows old. So going into more detail in the topic of today, so what are the barriers that persons with disability face when it comes to emergency communications? most of us are aware that traditionally emergency calls were voice-based, and by default, this excluded persons who had other communication needs, basically deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, and also people with some kind of speech impairment. But we need to understand that's not only the case, there's also non-disabled people that in certain situations, they might require other tools of communication. Sometimes after an accident, you lose the capacity to speak and hear. Sometimes you cannot speak because there can be someone at your home and you want to contact the police by using written means in order not to make any noise. Or sometimes the scene of an emergency is noisy and there's no visibility at all. So having the capacity to communicate in different ways is also beneficial for society as a whole. Removing the barriers that I mentioned and that are present in emergency communications, it's not charity, it's about human rights, it's about inclusion, and it's also about safety, and we have to keep this in mind. And this is where the concept of accessibility comes into play. Just to give some kind of broad definition on what accessibility is, we could say that accessibility is the characteristics of products, services, infrastructures, and environment that allow access to persons with disabilities on equal basis with others. Accessibility is key for persons with disabilities because it's the precondition to fully participate in society, to remove the barriers that we mentioned, and also we need to understand that's a human right. At the European level, also accessibility is a legal obligation. Most of us know the European Electronic Communications Code and also the European Accessibility Act. To ensure accessibility, this legislation makes reference to certain accessibility requirements that must be complied with, and also propose certain solutions, which is real-time text and total conversation. And to ensure that those solutions can be properly implemented, there will also be certain harmonized standards and technical specifications that will be developed. Why persons with disabilities prefer real-time text and total conversation over other type of solutions that have been developed so far? Well, the quick question is because they allow for the greatest degree of access, but I'm going to try to develop it a bit. The first reason is because, such as the traditional 112 calls used by non-disabled people, they are built-in solutions that require no pre-registration, or they require not to download an app to use it. The second reason is also that they are mainstream solutions. Once implemented, they are not specific solutions. They tackle the accessibility of the whole infrastructure, and that means that anyone, even non-disabled people, can use them at some point. They also give flexibility on the means of communication that we can use. So you can use voice, text, video, or a combination of the three. And they allow for real-time communication with pass apps 24/7 and also all over Europe. And equivalent access is also ensured in interaction with relay services as well, using also those two solutions. So to conclude a bit the presentation, what are the ideas that I would like to share with you? Well, the first one is that with the United Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Electronic Communications Code, and the European Accessibility Act, we have a legal framework to ensure the accessibility of emergency communications, and now we need to work to properly implement it. The second idea is that public authorities and stakeholders, they need to understand about what is accessibility and why it is important. And sometimes this is hard to understand, but the beneficials are for everyone. In ICT, most of the solutions that has been developed in mobile devices for accessibility, at first they were only considered for persons with disabilities. I'm talking about automatic subtitle, and like some decades ago, even the remote control for TVs. But now they are solutions that are used by anyone because they really improve the user experience. So we really need to understand that the benefits of investing in accessibility and making the solutions accessible for everyone are really beneficial for the whole of the population, especially persons with disabilities. The third idea is just to highlight that total conversation and real-time text are, for now, the solutions that for us would give the greatest degree of access. That the technology also to implement those solutions is there. ICT devices are prepared to hold this kind of communications, and with 5G, we think that this is possible, but most of the work needs to be done from the infrastructure side, especially base CIPs and telecommunication operators. And two last ideas. The first one is we need to start working if we want to meet the requirement for accessible emergency communications of the European Accessibility Act, and also that since standards will be developed in the coming months to ensure that these solutions are properly implemented, that emergency services and also organizations of persons with disabilities should be involved in this process to try to shape how these solutions will be developed. So that's it, and thanks very much.
Trying to find the remote control. Yeah. And I have my timer here. Hi, everyone. I'm Thor Nielsen, and I'm going to talk about implementing RTT in the core network. I work for a company called nWise, and we've been working with RTT since 2005. First, we worked with relay services. I don't know how many of you know what a relay service is, telecom relay services, enabling people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, to make phone calls, just like everybody else. Order a pizza or an emergency. So we are specialized in accessible communication. And so primarily work with telecom operators and government. So our goal is that people who are deaf, deaf-blind, and hard of hearing should be able to make phone calls and have access to emergency services. We are based in Sweden, and we have global operations, mainly in Europe, but North America, Middle East as well. Just some basics, because we've been talking about real-time text for quite a long time now. But what is real-time text, and what's the difference between real-time text, chat, WhatsApp? I love WhatsApp. My family lives in Brazil. I use it all the time. But I've never make an emergency call using WhatsApp. What real-time is, or real-time text is, it's a phone call. So we make a phone call to 112, for instance, in this case. And the text is standardized, and is sent character by character. And you can also backspace and delete the text that you have sent. So there are two ways of providing or getting real-time text. One which has been available since a few years back in the US, which is native RTT. So it's real-time text available right in your phones. So what you do, you go to accessibility, select real-time text, and it's available in your phone. And then in the US, in some areas now, you can make a call to 911 using your phone. Same in Canada, they are rolling it out. And now in Europe also, we'll be rolling out native RTT. So it's the telecom operators. And it's already in the infrastructure of the network, so it's there already. But when I talked to you also that we've been working with real-time text since the early 2000s, it's because we're using over-the-top apps, so apps that you have to download. And of course, it's not optimal, but it's a solution which is available and saves lives. But now we're seeing a transition to the next generation RTT, the native in the phones. Those apps can be available as 112 apps, like emergency apps. But in many countries, you also have the relay services that I was talking about. So in many countries, from a deaf person, deaf-blind, that uses an app to make a phone call via an interpreter, they can use the same app to make an emergency call, which is very important. Not all countries have that, unfortunately. EENA has published a document on the implementation of RTT and total conversation in Europe. And it's a very interesting document that gives more of the background on what has happened, how people have been working with it. So let's see, again, RTT, you can have native or over-the-top. So think about it, when you have a phone, like we're hearing, so we just pick up our phone, dial 112 and make a call, and the call goes to the Peace app. It's a magic way, but over the telephone network. And that's the same way you'll be doing with RTT when it's in the phone already. So once you activate RTT, you press, you just make a call. And when you're going to make a call, you just select that you want to use text and not voice. Once more, voice is available on RTT, so RTT is not only text, but there's a voice channel. Usually, if I'm deaf and I want to use RTT, I switch off the voice because I don't have control of the noise environment. So let's say if I'm at a train station, there's a lot of noise, so I don't want the noise to disturb the phone call with the relay service or whatever, point-to-point as well. But what the phone manufacturers do, if the call is placed to an emergency services, the voice channel is forced open. You work in a PSAP, you know that the sounds around whatever is happening are very important. If it's a shooting, a fire, what kind of emergency. So that's a basic, a very important difference between chat and RTT, because then the voice channel is always open. And the call goes via an RTT bridge, and then the RTT bridge should be connected, and that's the whole point. When you connect RTT to the voice infrastructure, then you enable real-time text to work and be available in the same way as voice calls, because in the old days, let's say in the US, where you made a text call with a text phone, the call ends up in a point, and then it cannot be transferred. You cannot go to the secondary. You cannot do anything with that. You cannot have a conference. But with the bridge, then you can just use RTT in the same way as voice, and that's very important. And even if the call comes from an over-the-top app, it goes the same way. So from a PSAP perspective, you don't have to think, is that an app? Is that native? What is that? You're handling a call with text and voice, and that's the importance of the call. Also, something that is very important is to think about the requirements. I work in a couple of committees at EENA in the US and Canada, and I was in a conference in January. And one of the questions that were raised a lot was that many of the states, the organizations or the PSAPs, they asked the vendor, do you have RTT? And the vendor said yes. So they put a check mark. And then they didn't know what they were getting. So that's the important thing. What are the functional requirements that you have for RTT? What are the technical requirements? And what standards do you have to follow? You don't want to get something that you'll be using now, and then when the native application is released, you cannot use it. You have to roll out a new solution. So we have to think about the functional requirements. So it has to be integrated in the same flow as the voice, because then for the PSAP, for handling emergencies, you handle text and voice in the same way. And that's what Daniel was saying about equal access, because that's what equal access means. You don't want to have your call handled in the corner there, or send a text message saying, well, I have a heart attack. And what happens then? I mean, it takes a lot of time. And then you can make your network RTT conference aware. That's something that people are talking a lot at EENA, because not many vendors are doing that. So that's a big issue, because then you cannot treat RTT as voice. And text presentation, T140, character by character, and you should be able to do the backspacing. That's part of the requirement. And that's something that we have to think about. The other streams can be mixed. It's easy to identify voice, but when you present text for the agent, for the PSAP, text presentation is done in a little bit. You have to think about different things when you present text. Call recording. How do you do the recording? Because since you can do backspace, you have to record everything that is transmitted, including backspace. Technical requirements has to be scalable, high level. It's the same requirements as you have generally for a voice platform. So that's the same thing. And then the standards, what kind of standards you're using, RFCs, and the list is there. I'm just saying that my time is running out. So you can come to our stand, and we can give you more information about that if you want. I just wanted to also have another slide about total conversation, Because as Daniel was saying, total conversation is really important. And that's if you're deaf and signer, you can even be deaf, blind, and signer, it's a big difference. You want to use sign language via an interpreter relay service. The difference is that total conversation at this stage is only available as over-the-top, as opposed to RTT, which is available in the network, in the phones, and it's standardized. So that's something that we have to consider as we prepare for 27 and prepare for the EAA. So how should we roll out total conversation? I understand from EENA also that it'll be the standardization discussions will start very soon after the summer. So it's a little bit of work to be done there about total conversation. Not least necessary, but you have to think how it is available now. 10 minutes. So thank you. And if you want to talk to us more about RTT and how to implement in the core network, stand number 7. And then our partner, CSAM, is actually doing a demonstration on how RTT works in the PSAP integrated with voice. So please send, we have some questions afterwards or come to us. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Kelly from ECAS, the Emergency Calls Answering Service in Ireland. And I wanted to talk about the challenges that PSAPs will have in implementing real-time text, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the future and what it might mean from a PSAP perspective. Okay, so in preparing for this, I was trying to find a real-time text definition that resonated with me, at least. Thor has made a very good attempt at trying to define it, but I do think that this one from the FCC in the US is useful. There's 2 parts to it. I think particularly the second part, lots of people think that real-time text is like WhatsApp, but at the end of a WhatsApp message, you need to press send. With real-time text, it's character-by-character transmission and seen at both ends. Now, in the Irish case, and this will vary country to country, about 2% of our population are registered as deaf. So that's about 100,000 people. We do think that there's going to be challenges in terms of longer call handling times. We've already seen this with SMS, which is in place for a number of years. Call handling times can be 20 times as long for SMS, and I don't expect real-time text to be terribly different. That's going to cause resource constraints. And I suppose, just in terms of our call takers, the messages that we get from the Deaf Society, they may not look like text-based messaging from the rest of the population. And I was struck by the fact that not all deaf people use sign language, but sign language users have a different syntax for English, or in our case, in Irish as well. So that needs to be taken into account. The example I use there is that a sign language user using real-time text might say, "I help need," rather than "I need help." Now, it's straightforward to see what is being said, but for a more complicated sentence, the syntax is important. So we will need some supports for our team, and we plan to get some input from the deaf community itself. Now, the other thing about the deaf community, of course, is that some people are simply hard of hearing. Their hearing isn't as good as the majority of the population, or they may have lost their hearing. So originally they had hearing, and now they have difficulty. So we expect that they will be the biggest users of real-time text because they will have been educated through English or Irish as children, and that has certain advantages to the PSAP. I think also what we've learned is that the deaf community, obviously it's not an homogenous group, but it does see itself as a linguistic and cultural minority, so as opposed to being disabled. And I think that's important. And I come back to this later on, but I think one of the challenges for real-time text is, will this community actually accept real-time text, or will they simply see it as a stepping stone to video services in the future? And the next point is a really important one for us. If you're lucky enough to be under 30, or you're related to someone who is, you'll probably notice that they never make voice calls. Their preferred method of communication with anyone or anything, any organization, is via texting. So we actually expect that once real-time text goes live, that we will see particularly the younger population using this. And the issue it presents is that it is impossible to predict what the volumes might be. But genuinely, from my research, I believe that this group, the younger group, might be the greatest users of real-time text of all. So on the technical side, and I won't get into the deep technical pieces, Thor has in his presentation has mentioned the standards and so on. So of course they need to be addressed. But a native client is going to be required on the handset. So that needs to be downloaded from the networks automatically, but it's not an app. Now, what happens if we have a visitor from another country who doesn't have real-time text? That country doesn't support it. How will we support them? We also need to support, in some shape or form, over-the-top apps from other countries. So, for example, a Dutch visitor who would be used to using the over-the-top app, how will they communicate with the Peace app in Ireland when they visit? And also then, will this solution, whatever it is, will it automatically be available for visitors? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure that out. We think from the Peace app itself, from the call taker's point of view, there are a lot of similarities with SMS today. So we think that we will be able to integrate in some shape or form how the call taker handles real-time text, and it will have similarities in that certainly for day one, we will be doing a verbal relay of what's in the text to the stage 2 services. Another big issue for Peace apps is evidence requests. The fact that we will now have real-time text as well as the real possibility of an audio channel presents big problems in terms of assembling evidence for a court case or an investigation. And we have some ideas about that, but no definite decisions as yet. We also need this for our internal call quality monitoring as well. And also I think it may help if we can open up a voice channel directly to the caller, even if they have not asked for one. But again, these are use cases that we need to define and better understand. Secondly, on the technical side, I've mentioned this earlier, but some deaf users will use different syntax, and obviously this is going to vary from country to country and from language to language. But if sign language is the primary language of the deaf person, they don't express themselves necessarily in what we would, the rest of the community would recognize as text. So, look, there's no easy solution for this, but what we expect to happen is that we will need extra support for the call takers, and indeed one of the things that we're considering is maybe AI. Not so much that AI is a perfect solution, but it may be able to bring speed to the conversation. And as we all know in emergency services, speed is of the essence. The other thing is, I suppose this is what we would call in Ireland the haves and the have-nots. Real-time text, will it only be available on the very latest and perhaps the most expensive handsets? I think in some countries, for the deaf community, top-of-the-line handsets are subsidized by the government or by the state. I don't think that's the case in Ireland. But obviously, we want to be able to give deaf people the best possible user experience, and that may require having the latest and greatest mobile phone handset. The other thing that we need to worry about is network dependencies. So this is designed to work over 4G and 5G. Luckily in Ireland, 4G is universal, but it's only when we actually see this working in practice will there be spots of the country where it doesn't work. What do we do then? And will there be some sort of a fallback option for these users? The honest answer is, I don't know. And we've also got to worry about limited service state, which is an issue today with voice calls. I think these problems will only multiply as we go forward with real-time text. And then last but not least, on the technical side, I'd just say that how about real-time text support for other languages? Now, this is a problem that every country will have. Obviously, you have your own native language or languages, but particularly for visitors or for temporary residents. An idea might be to transfer this call to the home piece app of the caller. So, for example, if it's a Swedish tourist, because it's real-time text, we may be able to transfer this directly to the Swedish piece app, and they can support or take the lead in terms of offering assistance. Again, it's more of a question, but it's one that we have to find a solution to. Now, I suppose last but not least, on the challenges side, right? I think the big question, and this is why I've put it in bold, is will real-time text be enough? Is it equivalent? It's a pretty subjective assessment, I think. Thor had mentioned it, but total conversation is certainly on the horizon. It will be what's next. Unlike real-time text, I really couldn't find a proper definition of total conversation. So just in my own poor English, I consider it to be a combination of real-time text plus an audio channel and then video with sign language. But as I say there, it's a gross oversimplification. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into what does it really mean, what does the user experience need to be, and how will we deliver it. Irish Sign Language is unique to Ireland, and again, in researching this, I've begun to discover that most sign languages have unique characteristics in their respective countries. And even though I already said we've 100,000 deaf people or hard of hearing people in Ireland, it seems that only 5,000 of that group actually use sign language. So I'm probably arguing against myself here, but it could be that...
Michael, I need to keep the time. So.
Okay, sorry. I'm nearly finished. So look, there will be challenges with that for a very small portion of the deaf community. And then last but not least, I think staffing is going to be an issue. We will need sign language interpreters. There are very few of them. They're in short supply. They really can only come from your own country. So that's going to be a difficulty. And I suppose the other thing that we need to figure out is, will sign language interpretation and indeed support for real-time text, is that something that the Stage 1 piece app will do for the Stage 2, like for example, the police and the ambulance? And last but not least, international language support. Personally, I don't think we will support it, but we do need to find solutions for visitors. So that's just a quick checklist of some of the issues that we are considering. Obviously, there are more, and hopefully this was of some use to you. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks for your presentations, and you actually brought up a lot of questions. So I would like to ask the audience, do you have additional questions? Now it's time for Q&A. Brooks.
Yeah, thank you. Is anybody in the audience from the United States? Okay, great, awesome. I'm from the United States too. I work for the National Emergency Number Association. So we're tracking the progress of RTT adoption in the United States. And the reason I ask for the folks that are from the States in the back is that we can, of course, initiate native RTT from a mobile phone. Now, that might very well be downgraded to TTY at the PSAP, right? But what we see is that there's not much of an adoption yet of RTT in the United States. I don't know if that's because people in the accessibility community don't know about it or simply do not care to use it. We don't really know, but I'm curious for the folks that are in this session from the United States, if they have an understanding or an opinion, or if anybody else does, frankly, because RTT for us at EENA is a really great tool to improve accessibility. Yes, it is absolutely a human right, but we need to make sure that it's easy for people to use. And we think that there might be some challenges there.
I'm in a committee at EENA, Accessibility Committee, and we discuss that a lot. I think the issue is that the telecom operators in the US are not talking about RTT, so there's a lack of education, lack of information, lack of training. The PSAPs are not, they need more training, they need more engagement with the local community. There is a big issue in the US, we're not going to do that in Europe, but in the US, as you're saying, Shannon, if the PSAP or the region where the call is being made doesn't have RTT, the call will be downgraded to TTY, to text phones. And that is a challenge because it's very slow. It requires, the text doesn't work properly. So there's a lot of issues when you do that. Location information, you just lose a lot of points. So that is a problem. I think the way it has been implemented in the US can't be a challenge, I think. The different levels of legislation, the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, is responsible for one thing, the states are responsible for another legislation, and then you have the county and the local governments. So the different layers of decisions, I think they affect that. But I think education is something that needs to be done, information, and let's say making RTT known to the wider population.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, so I do have a few questions, and I would like to group my questions into the community. So that would be questions to you, Daniel, the technology, and the PSAP for sure. So a question, I mean, you can all answer to my questions. So my first question would be to Daniel, looking at the latest trends in technology, like AI, chatbots, or I've also seen avatars for sign language. Do you think that total conversation real-time text is everything, or do we oversee something? Or what are the latest trends, and are you looking at those trends and consider them as additional technology that may help for accessibility?
I think that the answer here is a bit complex because obviously there will be some solutions that don't exist right now and that can be extremely helpful in the future. And I think the disability community has always been early take-up of a lot of technology developments. What we know, and this is the official position, for example, of the deaf and hard of hearing community, is that real-time text and total conversation for now are the ones that will provide equivalent access, because I think it's the one that are closer to the experience that other people will have when calling the 112 emergency services. So of course, if there are new solutions, I'm sure they will be welcome and they need to be discussed. But for the time being, these are the ones that we consider to be most relevant.
Okay, thanks. I think that if we have the right, let's say, technology in the back, so if it's changing to packet switch technology, or I would call it IP based or SIP based end-to-end, I think then we have a good foundation to also introduce new technology. So that could be something beyond this total conversation and real-time text. But for me, that's the basis, and yeah, we always have to look into the future if we look at standardization as well, because that takes some time. And so the sooner we know the trends and what needs to be done, the better.
I was just going to add that it's difficult to see what the next technologies will be beyond total conversation. But I think if the past is any indicator of the future, you know, some of these applications, these services, they evolve into something greater than what they were originally designed for. So, and I do think that the greater population has a role to play, because if they also adopt real-time text, for example, I think that additional features will be added in as well. And so we will see real-time text evolve over the next probably 5 to 10 years.
Okay. The question to Thor, you have a lot of international experience, and perhaps it's also a question to Daniel. I'm just wondering if, when looking at the user interface, how can we ensure that if you grab any telephone or any mobile device, that you have the same experience at the user interface? Is this also considered? Because real-time text standardization means the technology behind, but can I really take every phone and just use it?
To be honest, I cannot take any phone and make a voice call either. So with RTT, unfortunately, we have the same problem. There's also another problem or hinder. If you're deafblind and you need Braille to read, then the application on the phone won't work for you. So there are some limitations. So RTTs, let's say native RTT is not the holy grail. We do have to think about smaller communities and how people use the phones. A very good question. So if an elderly person that's not used to using a mobile phone, it's like, well, make your RTT call. It's a good question. Yeah. Education, again, is very important. I think. I don't know what you think.
No, I think, yeah, I completely agree. And also to keep in mind that also if this is not in place, it's always thinking, what is it that we need? And the ideal is that, I mean, now if I take the phone from someone, I can call the emergency number without even having to unblock the phone. So obviously the ideal and the trend we should go to, even if it's not yet possible, but thinking is that possible in the future? And I'm sure with technology, there will be some solution in some years that will make it possible. So yeah, I mean, that's a bit to compare.
Yeah, thanks. Let's move on with technology. So, and I'm looking into the audience. So perhaps, do we have someone? Yeah, there's Tony. Yeah, cool. So I'm just wondering what's being done in the end devices. Yeah, so how to make sure that we get real-time text really end-to-end. A lot of stakeholders. Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Wolfgang. Tony O'Brien from the Safety and Location team at Apple. Just a couple of comments. I mean, firstly, 3 presentations were fantastic. So thanks to Michael, Daniel, and Thor. I mean, we being Apple have had a number of conversations over the last number of months with EANA. And to Brooks's point earlier about RTT in the US, RTT in the US is available since 2018, and it's natively available on iOS devices, Apple devices since then. So it works today, and it's available for the community to use in the US. So I guess the next point, I think this is Daniel's second remark on his conclusion slide about starting work for RTT deployment in Europe, got us thinking about how we could potentially start to learn about RTT in Europe, given that it's not currently available in Europe. So some conversations with EENA over the last couple of months. We've had a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings in relation to how we could start this. So what we have decided to do in conjunction with EENA is to actually start testing RTT in a number of countries in Europe later in the summer. And the 2 countries that we've pinpointed in terms of being able to start RTT testing in a very controlled way, right? So this is just in a test mode, let's say, is Sweden and Ireland. And I know Thor and his team will be involved in the Swedish deployment as well. So the objective here really is to learn about how end-to-end RTT could work in the emergency 112 scenario. And I mean, there are lots of stakeholders involved. There's the device side, us. There's the network providers that carry the RTT message. There is the software leap, if you will. between the network and the PSAP, and sometimes that involves a number of other stakeholders, and then obviously into the PSAP call-taking system itself. So the idea here, Wolfgang, is to do some tests and publish a white paper. That EENA will publish a white paper. I think September is the timeline that we have in mind to be able to share the learnings that we've made along the way across all the different stakeholders, with the view to starting or to increase the conversations, let's say, about RTT, which we all know what the deadlines are, but maybe we can reach ahead of that deadline to make RTT available for the community. So really excited to, like I say, understand a bit more, learn a bit more, and we'll see how we go during the next couple of months. So starting shortly with a September timeline for publishing our findings. So more to come.
Yeah, thanks. That's actually great news. You know, I'm always involved in testing, so we have these plug tests in Europe. So it would be great if you could join such tests as well. And I think I need to talk to my colleagues, because we may contribute the other end, the PSAP equipment. Yeah, great. So I have a question that perhaps relates to all this for all of you. Thinking of having this technology end-to-end, I think it's then IP-based and it's SIP-based, so you would have to have a SIP dialogue end-to-end. So would you agree that such an infrastructure comes first before we get a full deployment of real-time text and total conversation, or do you see more solutions that just simply run over the top, and perhaps that there are 27 different solutions in Europe where we may have a challenge with roamers? So what's your take on that?
Well, over-the-top apps are already available using RTT, and the Netherlands has adopted that and implemented in 2014, so it's been available for many years. But I think the delegated regulation and the EAA is very clear on the requirement of having it native. Also, the infrastructure is ready for RTT. So companies like Ericsson, Nokia, they deliver the necessary infrastructure. As Tony was saying, the phones are ready. So honestly, I don't see why there should be much of a delay. I think it's making sure that the deadlines are met and that we move on.
I was more thinking of the other requests in the delegated act, like routing to the most appropriate PSAP, making sure that it works with roamers or visitors. So I think that might not be covered if you just simply have your over-the-top application that just runs at home, but you cannot use it anywhere else. So for me, I think it's very important to have the right infrastructure also end-to-end.
Yeah. Over-the-top is already, as I say, it's been available for a while, so let's move on to the next step. I think you're completely right.
I was just going to add that you know, SIP infrastructure or enabling SIP on your PSAP infrastructure it's something that PSAPs need to be doing now if they haven't already completed that project. We're ready. We still have quite a lot of work to do, but you know, it's a big project with a lot of testing. And it's going to take a lot of time. So the sooner people start, the better.
Yeah, fully agree. And you mentioned PSAPs and challenges for PSAPs. Do we have anyone in the audience who can contribute a little and share some experience? Oh, great. Can you get a microphone, please?
My name is Erika Intveld. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm an advisor 112 for police, ambulance, fire departments, and the military police. And we got it integrated real-time text since 2014, you say, Thor? Yeah. What we see is that we have a population of 17 million people in the Netherlands, and 1.5 million has a deaf and hearing impairment. and 30,000 people are deaf from birth. Approximately, we get 40 real-time text calls a month, and our call takers, I must explain it better. We have a two-stage PSAP system. Our first stage PSAP is taking in all the calls from the deaf and hearing impairment group via real-time text, and they are working like a relay center for the second stage PSAP. What we learned while implementing it is that you should involve the deaf and hearing community from the start. That's the most important thing, because like what Mike said was the grammar sentences are different. You want to know what they need, how they want to get help. So what we did with the deaf and hearing impairment target group, we designed standard sentences, and we integrated that into the system with the most frequently asked questions that the PSAPs are asking the person that needs help. I do not think if you have a good target group to work with, that the challenge about how to communicate with somebody from the deaf and hearing community is a big issue. What we see is that it actually goes pretty well. You had a good example of what kind of sentences you could expect. I got another one. John has fallen from the stairs. And what we get is John, stairs, fallen. Well, for a call taker, it's pretty accurate enough to know that the person needs help, and we know what to do. I do think it's a really good thing. We use total conversation. The thing that could get better is that we do not have a 24/7 sign call video situation. I think that should be better. But 112 is always available. We also use it in our 112 app. And I think it's a good thing. And even if we will get real-time text the native way, I still believe the deaf and hearing community will use this solution, and native real-time text could be a nice fallback in case if something goes wrong with this solution. That's my story.
Yeah, yes, thanks for the story. So it's always good to hear something that is in operation. And may I ask another question? Is this only for deaf and hard of hearing limited? I mean, the use of your system, or is it open to all the citizens?
No, it's mainly used by the deaf and hearing impaired. They can get the TC app on their phone, and unfortunately it's not free, but the health insurance company will cover that, so it's only used there.
Any additional comments? Thanks for the contribution. Yeah.
The way it's set up in the Netherlands is also if I type 112 in my app, it goes directly to the PSAP, but I can also choose to use total conversation and go via an interpreter. So the choice is there, but we have seen that many people, even people who use sign language, they prefer to use RTT and communicate direct to the PSAP. That's why also Eric was saying the number of calls are higher. The number of calls via the video relay services are very limited, because they just think, I want to call direct. It's a question of empowerment, I think, because traditionally as a deaf person, you had to use somebody else to make a call, and with RTT, you are in power of your call. I think that's a very important thing.
I have one last question. Just think of my kids, how they use their phones. So they are just texting. So if I want to get in touch with them, I cannot call them, I need to text. And when watching them how to text, they are not doing character by character, they are just enabling auto-completion and just swipe. And yeah, it's amazing how fast they are. So if this real-time text is a solution that is open to everyone, would that be then adopted by this generation, or do we need another solution then if, let's say, people would like to text their emergencies in the future?
Well, I think for me, I can see real-time text for the younger community superseding SMS. We're already beginning to see SMS fall away a little bit, but it's from very low volumes. I mean, it's never been a successful service in terms of total volumes. But I think as real-time text is adopted in other industries, for example, if people are going to use real-time text to interact with their bank or to order a pizza, it just becomes part of normal life. And I think the expectation will increase that people would also want to use real-time text to interact with emergency services. Maybe not only to make a call, but also to add supplementary information. And that's why I think real-time text may evolve for greater support of video, a different type of video perhaps to total conversation.
Daniel?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to highlight again that, I mean, real-time text and the deaf and hard of hearing community really welcomes it and is going to use it, but they also highlight the importance of using also sign language when necessary, because it's true that in certain emergencies you just write a small sentence and that you get it, but sometimes what you want to communicate, it's more complex. And we talked about WhatsApp, but we use also voice notes in WhatsApp when we need to explain something that's complex, because it takes a lot of time to think how I'm going to write that to make it understandable for the other. So using voice, which is our more natural mean of communication, really helps out. So we also need to take into account that of course they are going to use that, but having all the other possibilities, depending on the situation, is also helpful, because in a situation of stress, sometimes you communicate better with your main means of communication. So it's something that I wanted to highlight, saying that both are important. Of course, some are easier to deploy, but both would be taken up by the community.
Yeah, thanks, and I think it's time. Thanks for the concluding statement. Thanks for the great presentations, and I think I need to make some closing remarks before we close the session. So, very important, next on the agenda is a coffee break in the exhibition area. So it's at both levels, and it's from 11:05 right after this session to 11:30. And then I would like to invite everyone to be back at 11:30 and join here in Gallus Hall the session called An International Perspective on Next Generation Implementation and Operation. In Linnart Hall, you will hear about exchange of data between emergency services organizations. Kosovel, you will hear about involving citizens in disaster management, and don't miss the industry session in Sid Hall. So thanks for joining the session. Thanks again to our speakers, and have a good day. A good coffee.